Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with Thomas Miller. Are you tired of your tween, teen, or young adults' dysfunctional behaviors holding you emotionally hostage, controlling your family, and ruling your life? Do you feel like you're riding an emotional roller coaster every time you walk into your house? If you answered yes, then you're in the right place. This podcast is a community for courageous parents just like you who come here to gain effective tools, skills, learn concrete action steps, and take power back so they can change their tween, teen, or young adult's life and change their family's future. Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with your host, Thomas Miller. Today's topic is stop reassuring or accommodating your kids. And we're going to dive into why that is actually not helping your kids. I know that sounds counterintuitive because you're like, wait a minute, it's our job to reassure, our little princess or bumpkin and make them, perfect and everything great for them. But it's actually not helping. Before we dive into that, though, I just want to make a shameless plug for my newsletter as well as the Four Peaks Parents community. If you don't know, there's this amazing community that exists where parents who listen to this podcast and parents who don't listen to this podcast come and join with other parents, and together iron sharpens iron and we become stronger as a parenting community. In that community, there's monthly Q&As with me that are free. They're every single month, 90 minutes. You can get any question answered live. You can email me questions in advance. You can just ask me questions in the midst of those meetings. So it is a fantastic resource and a wonderful accompaniment to this podcast. And again, at the end of this podcast, check out the show notes and you'll see the newsletter and how you can get more involved. All right, so back to today's show about not accommodating your kids. It can sound weird, right? We think our job is to make our kids' lives easier and to smooth out things and to possibly remove speed bumps. But believe it or not, whether your kiddo has OCD, which I'm going to break that down for you in a second, or whether or not your kiddo has anxiety, if you're not careful, you are playing a role in making them sicker or weaker or more anxious or just not as resilient as they could be, because so many kids go to mommy and daddy, for reassurance, and it creates a loop, and it's not having them, develop their own coping skills to address whatever they're stressed out about, concerned about, worried about. And so what you have to understand is if your child, again, has OCD or has at least anxiety, they are experiencing distress. And rather than, again, them developing the tools to heal, clot, and manage that stressor, they are coming to you, and that becomes a process that's going to ensue again and again and again and again. If you're shaking your head and you know exactly what I'm talking about, then you're already in this loop and the toothpaste is out of the tube. We can get it back in, but it's going to be a little bit hard because it's created, again, it's a loop where they're in distress, they seek accommodation, they seek reassurance, and you initially may have done this thinking you were in fact helping them. And I'm sure this came from a degree of love and a degree of intentionality. However, they're bypassing, again, their own coping. Give you a story. So just worked with a family a little while ago whose son was looping. That's a term, having an obsessional loop about what if the ceiling fan falls on him while he's sleeping, which was above his head. And while, again, this could seem like a very basic thing to just remove the blades of the ceiling fan, which is in fact what this family did. What that does is it strengthens the obsessionality or strengthens the first distressing or fear-based thought. Rather than allowing this child, to feel uncomfortable and teach a whole bunch of grounding and mindfulness skills and other coping skills that he can do to ostensibly allow this thought to burn off, they went right toward solution, right toward accommodation, right toward reassurance, which provided temporary relief. But in the long term, didn't help him to exhaust and extinguish that obsessional thought, that intrusive thought, that looping thought. So again, what seems counterintuitive and might seem antithetical to allow our children to be a little uncomfortable and to join with them and accompany them and give them skills and tools and strategies. Believe it or not, if we want to eventually allow our kids to get out of any of these loops, then we have to allow them to be a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning. It's sort of like when we have a temperature, that's the body's way of heating up, right, our system so that we can ward off this virus. There are families, I'm sure, who probably give their kids, Tylenol or medication when they have a 99 or 100. And I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to give out medical advice. I'll just speak to what we do in the Miller household. We do not give our kids, medication immediately the moment they have a temp. We let them cook for a little bit. Now, I'm not talking 105. That would be not safe and very dangerous. But we let our kids get a little uncomfortable because we want their bodies to build up, right, its own resistance. We want our children to be able to figure out, right, and allow that immune system to really get stronger to be able to address and eventually, right, kill that virus. So let's dive into what the heck OCD is, okay? So many people, when you think of OCD, people think of like clean people or super organized people. So that's a really common misconception. A lot of people think that OCD, is sort of a part of someone's personality, that they're actually referring more to what's called obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is something that adults would have when you think of a very type A personality, or you think of a very ritualistic personality, or someone who rigidly adheres to routines, or again makes lists and follows a very prescriptive way of kind of operating, their everyday. That's not what OCD is. OCD is where someone is having an obsession, which is a thought that's intrusive, it's highly uncomfortable, and it's occurring over and over and over again. And it feels outside of the person's control. People with OCD, they don't want these thoughts. They often find them very disturbing because in most cases they're inappropriate and unwanted. And people may have insight and realize that these thoughts are illogical, or they may not. With kids a lot of times don't realize that these are illogical thoughts or that they're intrusive thoughts. And so unfortunately, a lot of children that I've worked with throughout my career, when I've provided, tons of, therapy to children, oh my God, the first 15 years of my career was hundreds and hundreds, thousands of kids. There were so many kids that didn't realize that these intrusive thoughts were in fact an obsession. They thought they were like bad or deviant, or really started to think about themselves in a negative light because, again, the thought might be sort of inappropriate or about something bizarre or illogical. So again, realize that OCD is not about being clean or neat or organized. It is about having these intrusive thoughts again and again and again that are unwanted. So again, the public misconception, which you hear all the time about, everyone's got a little bit of OCD. That's not really true. Some people, certainly have maybe traits of or certain aspects of. We all have at times, obsessional thoughts, let's say, right? But we don't have obsessions that haunt us on the daily basis unless we have OCD that are highly intrusive. And this isn't like a minor personality quirk or preference. And so they have obsessions, and then they also have compulsions, right? And compulsions are repetitive behaviors or thoughts that a person uses to basically counteract the obsession. The reason why I say thoughts is because a lot of times people, when they have compulsions, you don't really see it. And so a lot of times people think compulsions have to be like a behavior, like checking or washing your hands or something like that, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a counter thought. And so the person who has this obsession is now engaging in a compulsion, essentially to try to make, right, these obsessions go away. They want to feel a little better. And it's a temporary solution, and it really doesn't change the OCD. In fact, the compulsion tends to strengthen it and entrench it deeper and deeper and deeper. And they often can become incredibly time consuming and get in the way of important activities. So, again, this podcast today is not just about does your kid have OCD, because there's so many families that I coach where their kiddo has anxiety and they immediately go toward accommodation. They immediately go toward reassurance. No, that will never happen to you. So the moment your kiddo comes to you with a what if thought, right? Think of it as you're at a train station and a train pulls up. And if a train pulls up that's not going toward the destination that you're supposed to be going to, you're not going to get on that train, right? However, children, teens, tweens, young adults, right? Adults as well. The moment we have a what if thought, we're pretty much emotionally hijacked. And it's like getting on a train where we don't know how long we're going to be on that train, what the eventual destination is, how long we're going to be there. So it's often a futuristic, future-oriented, catastrophic, fatalistic thought. And our job in that moment, believe it or not, is not to say that will or will not happen. It's not to immediately reassure our child, you're fine, no one's going to laugh at you. You are going to get, asked to the dance. You are going to get into said college. You are going to make that penalty kick. This isn't going to, happen. Our job is to first and foremost validate where our kid is at, and be where they are, and to solicit a little more information, and to really actively listen and let them share what they're feeling. And if it is feeling a little intrusive or loopy, obviously we can talk, further offline. And again, speaking to the community I spoke about earlier, there's so many opportunities to jump on a discovery call with me and explore whether or not, you want to work together with me. But for this moment and for that moment, when you're sitting in front of your kid, let's really think about, here's our opportunity to help them stretch like a rubber band. Here's our opportunity to help them develop their own ability to clot. I always say that we don't want children to be emotional hemophiliacs, where one, feeling just bleeds into the next and they just feel to death, right? When we have a cut, right, what helps us clot is hemoglobin. And so we need some coping hemoglobin, if you will. We need some coping skills. And we need our children to have these coping skills so they can handle and manage, right, the hurt, the pain, whatever it is they're going through, the fear, the worry. So I'm going to dive back into a little bit of OCD so you can hear how easy it is to get sucked into this. So there's so many subtypes, by the way, but a very common obsession that you may hear, right, with your kiddos is a fear of coming in contact with something that they deem to be contaminated. That's called a fear of contamination. That could be anything, right? Bodily fluids, germs, dirt, believe it or not, household chemicals, you name it. So whenever you hear what if I am going to get sick, or what if this will happen, what if that will happen, right? Yes, we all went through COVID. Yes, we all washed the heck out of every little thing coming into our house in the beginning, which was crazy. And I don't even want to revisit that time. I feel like, oh my God, I've blocked out COVID. I don't even know time-wise, and it's amazing. I just think of before and after COVID. But again, if our child is, not a fan of dirt or this or that, or they have pain on their fingers, and they're immediately looking for us to wash that off, or immediately looking for us to accommodate them. Or I've worked with a family not too long ago where the child had organized the entire family to go through this super rigid hand washing routine before they ate. That family unwittingly, right, is strengthening that kid's anxiety because they are being co-opted by that girl in this case, right? She was the conductor. And I used to say to them all the time, as parents, we're supposed to be the conductors, right? We're not supposed to be in the pit, as in playing the instrument that our child is assigning for us, right? It's not a democracy parenting. That doesn't mean that we're draconian in our approach and we just, take a top-down parenting style. But once we recognize something's off, we definitely should not be co-opted by that, right, anxiety. Okay, so that's a clear one. Another very common obsessional type of OCD is perfectionism. So I've worked my whole career with so many type A kids. I call them like Poopa Diamond kids. They're so tight that, they're going to like, oh my God, right? Life is going to explode. I was just talking to this client the other day. She's a teenager and she's like wigging out because this girl has a 4.8 and she's got a 4.5 and what if, and all that sort of stuff. And yes, we do live in this uber competitive world where BC has an acceptance rate, I think, of 2.9%, and Harvard, I think, is 2.7. Someone can fact check me on that. And we do live in that crazy linear world where it's uber competitive, and they are, looking at, I don't even know how they're determining who the heck gets into that school versus who doesn't. But if someone is so fixated on excessive concern about evenness or exactness, or everything has to be perfect, or they have a fear of making mistakes or fear of losing, that is going to not be fun. And if you have a child that has OCD or close to OCD or just has tons and tons of anxiety, my heart goes out to you, and I know how challenging it is. And I know that you have like such a tendency to just like give in. And if I could just accommodate or reassure, then I could take a breath and maybe I can get back to like actually having a life and not be harangued by them. But please know that every time you accommodate or reassure, you're strengthening it. You're not taking down Goliath. You're actually making Goliath stronger. And it's only going to be that much harder down the line to do that. Some clients I've worked with over the years, they have violent obsessions, and this doesn't mean they're violent, and it means that they're afraid of acting on an impulse of either hurting themselves or hurting someone else. I worked with a student for a really long time who had this looping thought of what if I hurt someone. And this kid had no violent tendencies at all. And obviously that's my job as a licensed therapist, right? To discern the difference between, of course, a kiddo that lacks empathy and might be oppositional and or might have what's called conduct disorder, as in potentially be a threat to others, versus a kid that's just being hooked, right, by an obsession. So it's so hard for kids to even admit some of these obsessions because, again, as I said earlier, more often than not, they're weird, or they might be societally inappropriate, or they might be about sometimes sexual obsessions or things that, again, are unwanted and intrusive, and they push them down, and it comes out in different ways. And they might be asking or seeking reassurance around, am I a good person or am I okay? Again, it's really important for us as parents to just think about the ROI of this, right? Accommodation, meaning what does this look like 20 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 months from now? If we're reassuring them now and we didn't ask them again to clot and to develop those coping skills, what might this look like down the line? And it's only going to be that much harder to take this down and help them exhaust. So please think about, the actions that we do today as having massive sort of ramifications down the line. So again, I covered a bunch of these obsessions. There's also obviously a bazillion more, right? From fear of being responsible for something terrible happening, religious or moral obsessions. But at any rate, if you feel like your kid is looping, meaning going around and around about a similar theme and seeking that accommodation, seeking that reassurance, it could be a sign that they have OCD, right? And again, they may or may not, depending upon their age, have insight that this is an intrusive thought and it's illogical and it's, again, something that's unwanted. And that, again, it should have nothing to do with who they are as an individual. Please help them separate that they're a good person, but in fact, they're right now got hooked, right, and are looping. And there's so many evidence-based modalities that can help. I'm trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, dialectical behavioral therapy, I already said mindfulness, motivational interviewing, exposure response prevention. All of these, especially CBT and exposure response prevention, as well as mindfulness, are really helpful for OCD. And obviously, you can also look into potentially the age and depending upon the severity, medication management, acupuncture, etc. But whatever you do, if you could take anything away from today, please just don't think reassuring or accommodating your kid is a harmless action. right? We don't want to just get in, to just providing whatever it is the child feels they need in that moment if it doesn't feel globally like it's setting them up for success. So let me just tell you a story about how OCD, right, can just run roughshod all over a person and a family, right? And again, if you have a kid who has OCD, you probably are going to identify heavily with this story. So I had a kiddo who had an obsession about possibly hurting his mom. Okay. Now, again, please recognize in no way, shape, or form if somebody has a thought as an ideation to either hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, they clearly, right, need support. This is somebody that didn't have a thought and had a plan and wasn't going to act on it. They had an obsession. And when this happens to an individual, it's a good question to actually ask your kiddos to discern if it is OCD or just anxiety. When this intrusive thought shows up, when this obsession shows up, does it come over you like a whoosh or a wave? They're going to say yes. They're going to say a whoosh or a wave if they have OCD because they're completely emotionally hijacked. Their whole system is flooded and they feel so uncomfortable and their skin is crawling and they can't get this thought out of their head. And so this young man who is killing it right now in college and doing amazing, and that's not a joke. He's not he's not killing anybody. He's doing very well academically, socially, interpersonally, etc. But he had a thought about, what if I hurt my mom? And it just kept going on, and he'd ruminate and perseverate. That means kind of go around and around and around about it. And he was so embarrassed and so ashamed of it that he would push it down. And he couldn't tell anyone about it. He couldn't tell anyone. And he suffered for years and years and years until eventually, right, we began working together and I was his therapist. And I was able to help him say it. And when he first said it in my office, I'll never forget, he was violently shaking and crying because it was so intertwined to him, unfortunately, that he was a bad person because he loved his mom. And it happened younger when he was little. For whatever dumb reason, he watched his mom making, I think it was a PBJ or something, some kind of sandwich, and he saw the knife and it popped into his head because he thought about the knife for 1 second. He just was focused on the knife. And the next thing you know, he had this stupid obsessional thought that took him off, to somewhere really dark. And lo and behold, one of the cures through exposure response prevention, which I don't want to dork out too heavily on, but again, if we were working together, I would help you understand more about how you could put that into practice with your kid by doing little exposures. It's like help someone inoculate themselves against the obsession. It's kind of like the flu shot is the flu, right? It's dead virus, but it's the very thing that could make us sick. And so we build resistance against the flu by having little bits of the flu in us, and that's called inoculation, right? So the same thing is true with exposure response prevention. So with a lot of trust, a lot of rapport, a lot of support, this amazing young man was able to finally tell his mom what his obsession was. And he was shaking while doing it. And I front-loaded, of course, to the mom that this is an obsession and in no way, shape, or form do we need to worry about it. It's just OCD. And little by little, he was able to normalize, right, and take space and put a pause between that obsession and his compulsions because he felt like he had to do something to ward off that horrible obsession. He had to do something to feel better. And for him, it was touching things and counting things and moving things. There was all these very ritualistic behaviors to ward off that obsession. He can say that. We would even be able to joke at the end of our therapy sessions with his mom in the room. We'd be able to talk about that obsession so much that it became so commonplace, right? So normalized that it had no hook. It did not immediately induce a fight or flight response for him. And he could actually recognize that it's just the thought, and he could allow it to show up like a passing cloud and burn off. So if you have a kiddo who's really in the throngs of it, I know how much pain they're in. I know how much pain you're in. Please heed my warning. The last thing we want to do right now is feed this monster vis-a-vis accommodation and reassurance. I worked with a family recently who the child was looping on symmetry issues. Everything had to be in a line. They certainly were checking constantly the locks. And again, in the beginning, it seems benign. Like, sure, I'll go around the house and check locks with, my son or my daughter and make sure everything's okay. But guess what? It's never enough. It's a never enough proposition, because by the time you've checked the locks in the basement, well, what about, the locks, in the garage? Or what about, how many times did you check the lock? And then do you need to show the child that you've actually checked the locks? I was working with a girl recently who had a responsibility obsession, we would call it, more catastrophic obsessions about her mother possibly getting sick, and the compulsion that she would do, which she would knock on her head a certain number of times, right? Well, you can't force a child not to knock on their head, if you will, right? If they're engaging in that compulsion. But you can at least not reassure that you as the parent don't have cancer, and you don't need to go for 82 screenings or show them, your results. There's always a way in to shift things toward a little bit of a healthier place than where they currently are. Another family I was just working with, the daughter was very obsessed about a fire starting and breaking out. And for whatever reason, she was associating the iron being plugged in and or night lights, for whatever reason, starting an electrical fire. So they would go around with her, unplug, right, the night lights, make sure that the iron wasn't on, the oven was off, etc. You just see how this builds. So again, if your kiddo does not have OCD and is nowhere near any of these entrenched patterns, still let's take from today's episode that how do we witness, accompany, support, validate where they are without immediately providing the ointment or the solution? There's always an opportunity to help them become that much more resilient, to have that many more coping skills. And again, we'll spend more time in future shows talking about mindfulness, which is such a great, easy, free skill that you can provide to help your kids ground themselves so they're not emotionally hijacked and that they can get into the here and now. So just let's remember that if your child is looping and they're coming to you and they're seeking reassurance, as much as they may push back and act out, and you may feel the only way out is to, again, accommodate in this moment so you can maybe get back to work or go to sleep or watch your show and not be walking on eggshells, please realize that you are adding Miracle Grow to anxiety. There is another way. And obviously, please join the community and ask me questions, and I'll provide tons of more tips and tools and strategies, and we can explore what that might look like to help you step on a pathway to change. So I hope today was helpful. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon. Hey everyone, Thomas here. 2 quick things. First off, it means the world to me that you took the time to listen to my podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Number 2, while you were listening to this show, who was the one person that you thought could really benefit from this episode? And please share it with them. Also, if you haven't already, please sign up for my mailing list so you can get instant access to my free community. Here you will be able to connect with other parents in similar situations, as well as access my regular Q&A sessions where you can ask me anything and get headed in the right direction. The link is in the description.